Turn up the dive, feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the attic, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories are talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Good evening, all my weirdos and weirdettes. Thank you for joining me for Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and I'm delighted you're with me tonight, whether you're watching or listening live or catching us in the repeat. Thank you. I'm always excited, whatever guest I'm talking to, because I love talking to people. But there's one person I love talking to more on this show than anybody else, because I've talk to him so often it's like talking to a brother, and he is a very dear friend. He's an author, an illustrator, and biblical paranormal researcher. He lives in Waxahachie, Texas, which I'm sure I just mispronounced, with his 3 children and beautiful long-suffering wife. Beyond a lifelong love of arts and comics, his life has been consumed with the study of archaeology, cryptozoology, ufology, and astronomy in order to better understand the Bible, its teachings, and the one behind its creation. So I'm delighted to welcome back to the show, and also back to our old mysterious library time slot, my dear, dear friend, the one and only Jason McLean.
Waxahachie?
Waxahachie? How'd I get it? What'd I say?
You said Waxahachie.
Is that right?
Yeah, there is. How did you get that? There isn't an O or a U anywhere near that word. It's all vowels.
I must have heard you say it, and it must have stuck in there somewhere in my subconscious.
I say Waxahachie. Although, okay, hold on. Even long before I think I'd even been to Waxahachie. I mean, I grew up like 15 minutes north of here, technically 30 because you got it, in the city, from where I lived. But like I'd been to Waxahachie a couple times as a kid. But like one of the first things I really remember about Waxahachie was my dad telling me this story. He said there was these 2 guys. They're walking down the street, and they're trying to decide, is it Waxahachie or Waxahachie? They're going back and forth, and they're arguing it, right? They go into Dairy Queen, and they ask the lady, "Ma'am, can you please tell us the name of where we are?" And she looked at them and said very clearly, "Dairy Queen." So And I ended up moving here. Like so much has changed about everything around North Texas. But yeah, so Waxahachie. I'm back. You said Waxahachie. I just could not stop laughing at that. I
Hoochie,
had to give you
hoochie,
some
coochie,
crap for that. Yeah,
hoochie, coochie.
exactly. I mean,
That's so
I
good
was
to have
certain
you back.
there was a time where there's a few neighborhoods where that's probably far more true than it should be. But anyway, we'll move on.
Man, it's so good to have you back. What have you been up to since I chatted to you last?
So, I can say this now. I will, when I have all the details as to when and where and all that, I will let that know. But I've sold 2 comics to Antarctic Press. They're just both short stories, right?
Man,
Um,
congratulations. It's so fantastic.
Thank you. Honestly, I did them because they were like bucket list things. I've been trying to get like to say, like, what are the things I really want to be able to say I've done and get all that off the plate so I've got this other side job that I'm working. Um, you know, I got bills I got to pay, right? So I'm gonna be doing, with that. But it's like before all my time is consumed with this stuff I know I need to do moving forward and how I want to do it. What were my last 2 like art things where it's like I really want it was having a superhero comic printed by an actual comic publisher, and I wanted to do one comic with a friend of mine. Both got done, both got sold, so I'm happy as a clam. I'll once I have all the final details as to what comics they'll be published in and all that, I'll let everyone know. Aside from that, so I haven't taken down so Siru, I had to servers and all that, right? So I'm going to be taking that and changing the direction. It will be a comic. It's going to originally start off as a fictional comic. That's what it was, a online sort of fictional blog. I had this whole thing on it, and I decided to make it a real thing with what I was doing. And I've decided to go back to square one with it, and I'll be publishing comics on there again, and it'll be a lot of fun. Choopy, for those of y'all who ever saw the Choopy comics, they're going to go back to there again, a little different.
Right. I always loved those comics.
Thank
They're
you.
so much fun.
Yeah, it's going to be back, and it's going to be better than ever. And then, but I will be starting another website called the Christian Paranormal Perspective. That'll be an easy way to just say, hey, what are Jason's thoughts on these things? Here you go. And the advantage of that is it will have all of the citations and resources so that you understand where I'm coming from, and you can have these conversations with your friends. Because what I found so often is people are trying to talk, and the issue is you're like, well, hold on, let me go show you something, right? And some people are like, okay, well, how do you know? This will have all the resources available for you to look at and say, okay, here's all the links, here's everything I need to know, all available. So that's going to be coming probably by the end of the summer. I want to have a few more articles ready to go, and then I'll unleash that. So when that all comes out, I'll come and I will announce it to you. And honestly, I'll probably announce it here.
Oh, I'd love to have you back to chat about that. That'd be fantastic. Funnily enough, apparently, and you might know this, my girlfriend just very kindly sent me a music video by Miranda Lambert, which is called Waxahachie or Waxahachie or however the devil. So there's a
I
song.
haven't
about it
heard,
in
but
town.
if Miranda Lambert's calling it Waxahachie, I think I
No, I'm
probably
not
know
listening
why.
to it. I'm just reading
Yeah.
it like Miranda.
Oh, I didn't know. No, hold on.
Yeah,
I didn't know
Miranda
that.
Lambert, Waxahachie. I think it's the same
Yeah.
place as where you live.
Yeah, it would have to be.
Official
Yeah.
audio. I've got a feeling it might be like just one of the songs on her tracks. I don't think it was a hit. That might be one of the tracks on an album. I don't think that's why.
So here's the thing: Waxahachie is
that.
actually it's the center of the seat for Ellis County. Okay, little thing. Actually, a lot of this is in my book, which I have over there. Metroplex Monsters. I talk about this. Is that Ellis County was the most cotton producing county in the world in the 1920s and 30s. So, like Waxahachie it's important. Like, it's not a Dallas, right? It was never a Dallas, but in the history of the West, it's actually kind of an important city, as well as a few other places, right? So there you go.
Huh.
So I'm not surprised.
So very interesting. Somebody a moment ago said, "What show is this?" And I think that might be a joking reference to once doing Mysterious Library in this very time slot, which many regular listeners and viewers are probably used to. Now, since we're talking about your life, let's transition it to maybe kick off the show, because we're talking tonight about stories and legends as well as witness sightings of potential dinosaurs still coexisting with us today. And I'm sure many people have heard your story, but there's lots of listeners out there and viewers,
Yeah.
I bet you haven't. So
Well,
maybe you can, do you want to start it with that? Your
yeah.
sighting of what was essentially a prehistoric reptile in the sky, I guess, right?
Yeah.
What looked like a prehistoric reptile in the sky.
Right.
It's not prehistoric anymore. It's here.
Yeah, it's not prehistoric anymore. So, okay. So yeah, this is interesting because for those of you who were Mysterious Library fans, I know y'all are aware of the story, but we were talking today, and you're right. I don't think we ever really broached the subject in depth. So it's a good opportunity to do it. So the story, and again, you can find the story in Metroplex Monsters as well as a few other accounts. I was 12. It's like 1992. So technically I think I'd be 11 at this point because I turned 12 in October. It was like June. So, wasn't in school. And so we were fishing in this creek that's right beside, well, like half a mile to a mile, 3/4 of a mile from my house. And we were fishing in it, and we were packing up. It was like 10:30, almost 11, getting ready to, go home for lunch. And he had already left, right? He had already gone up the hill. And I was still packing everything up, and I hear this sound. And I'm like, what is going on? Because I've never heard a sound like that before, right? And so I poke my head out the tree line, and what I see is at first what I think is the largest blue heron I've ever seen in my life, right? And so now would probably be a good time because I've said this a lot, and I've just realized I didn't even do my spiel on how the thing the creek looked. Something you need to know from this point forward for a lot of this to make sense. I do think it's actually important to the overall idea of these things surviving. North Texas sits on a giant slab of limestone, right? And this is actually one of the reasons why cotton was like the number one cash crop in North Texas for a very long time. Still, in many ways, is, although we've got sorghum that's also up there now. But particularly, for the longest time, because it was the easiest thing to grow because we have very, very good soil, but it's very shallow. And there's a lot of rock, obviously. We basically just sit on this limestone slab. So all of the naturally occurring creeks, if there's any, they're all spate, meaning it's all rain and runoff, right? If they're of any size, they're cutting into that limestone bedrock, right? And so, and of course, all the trees and brush grow up around them, so they're very, very hidden. But they're off, but specifically the 10-mile creek, which is where I was, is like 15, 20 feet down into, from the surrounding area. Like, it's deep. In fact, I was just out there a couple months ago with Donnie because he wanted to see it while he was in town. And yeah, it's like 15, 20 feet deep, right? And essentially you can't even really get into the creek except for a few places where the wall has sort of collapsed in and creates sort of this beach area of rock. And so you can get down into it. That's how we did. Well, the trees, sort of line the air. And of course, the reason the trees and the tall shrubs would line that area is because every year that's where the water goes, right? It sort of floods. And so that's where all the water is. So it's very hard to see into these areas. Well, but where I'm at, right? Like I said, the wall had collapsed, sort of like a little drainage area. And so that's where I had been walking up. So I'm now elevated, right? But I'm still sort of in that tree line. I poked my head out. And again, I'm watching this thing come around the corner. And the thing you have to know, like I said, I know exactly how wide this thing is. So this is a wingspan of 8 to 10 feet, which blue herons don't get that big. So I'm thinking this is the biggest blue heron I've ever seen in my life. It's the neck kind of does that S-curve thing that herons and storks will do when they're flying long distances. I think what I see is its legs sticking out from behind it. It's, and it's the same color as a blue heron, sort of a Payne's gray, which is a bluish gray. And then it gets about right in front of my face. And I'm not kidding when I say this, its right wingtip is 5 feet from my face. I'm very close to this thing. And that's when I realized it has no feathers. And what I thought had been a tail, or what I thought had been its legs sticking out behind it, was actually a tail with a flange on the end of it, like a little diamondish shaped flange. And I'm watching it just go. And the thing is, the creek sort of snakes around, from Duncanville, DeSoto, Lancaster, Wilbur Hutchins, and joins up. I'm at sort of like a straightaway. I'm literally almost dead center of this straightaway. So I'm watching this thing. I realize what I'm looking at, it goes, banks around, disappears. I never see it again. And I didn't believe what I saw. Long story short, I just didn't believe what I saw for years. I didn't believe it because while I am a young earth creationist, flexible in what that means, and I knew there are plenty of accounts of living pterosaurs, in living dinosaurs, and I'm aware of them. Those were always in exotic locations. They were in Papua New Guinea or the Congo or, Scotland. It certainly wasn't in Dallas, Texas. So I didn't believe it. And here's where it gets worse. And I will admit it. I had known since like 1994, 1993, that there were accounts of pterosaurs in Texas, but it was South Texas, and they seemed to be larger. Most of the accounts seem to imply a larger pterodactyl-like creature. What I saw was clearly a rhamphorhactoid, and I've got a picture of Rhamphorhynchus. If you want to, it's one of the ones I gave you.
Was that the fossil?
Yeah, the fossil. Yeah.
Okay, hang on. Just let me pull that up for you.
And let me be very specific. It may not have been a Rhamphorhynchus, but it was a Rhamphorhynchoid. Like that. Again, the Rhamphorhynchus is very, very small. But essentially, they're flying reptiles, right? They're not true dinosaurs, but they're flying reptiles. But you notice they have the flange tail, longer necks typically, and they don't have beaks, right? The one I saw didn't have a crest. There are people who've seen them in North Texas that have described a short, stubby crest. Ken thinks they could be Scaphognathus or an offshoot of that, but it's a very specific thing. And so when I'm hearing about these these potential pterodactyls in South Texas, it doesn't mean that what I saw could be related at all, because I saw something else. So I didn't believe my account. I had known Ken Gerhardt, the man who wrote Big Bird in Texas, right? Hold on. I have the book right here. And we even did the book.
We did. People should go and check out. We did this when we did Mysterious Library in this time slot. They can go to the YouTube channel of Untold Radio, and they can find the episode where we did Big Bird pterodactyl episode, or they can go to wherever they listen to audio podcasts and find it. That was Mysterious Library.
Yep, Mysterious Library. We did a whole thing on this book. I had known Ken Gerhardt. Look at the cover. That's not a pterodactyl. That's a rhamphorhynchoid. I had known Ken Gerhardt for years before I told him my story, because I didn't believe it, right? I'm thinking it's all South Texas. And for those of you who do not understand how big Texas is, South Texas is a very long way away from where I am in North Texas. I'm closer to Oklahoma. Like, I can literally be in Oklahoma from my house in traffic in about an hour and 40 minutes.
Texas is bigger than most countries, certainly most European countries. Like, it's a massive state. If you drive across that state, you can tell how big that thing is. My goodness.
Oh, yeah. Well, so like this weekend, Tex and I are going to a conference just outside of San Antonio, right? It's in Schertz, Texas, so San Antonio is technically South Texas, right? But we're still way away. We're still multiple hours from the border. It's going to take us over 5 hours to get from where I am at to that area.
Phenomenal. Crazy.
And we're still not on, and that's not the border. That's north of San Antonio. So yeah, so the idea that if we're talking about the Rio Grande Valley, there's no way that has anything to do with what I saw, right? So that was what was in my head until finally I find out that there are accounts of these things in southern Oklahoma. So that sort of begins in earnest my journey. And now I've got my own thing of all of these North Texas to southern Oklahoma and west accounts of what are clearly the same type of creature. They're all described the same way. In fact, literally everyone who I think had a legit sighting have always said the exact same thing. I thought I was looking at a pelican or a stork or a crane. I've gotten one owl, but that's because it was at night, right? So you would expect like a great, but they always said I thought I was looking at one of these birds that do the same thing with their neck, where they sort of rest their head on their shoulders, so their neck makes an S curve, and they're clearly gliding like a pelican or a crane. And they said that's what I thought I saw until I took a closer look. They literally all say the same thing, right? It's to answer Rabbit's earlier question about Texas soil. Again, it's not that it couldn't. And there are plenty of crops that are grown in Texas, like corn and wheat. And again, sorghum is a big one here. Hay, obviously, but the reason cotton did so well, it was very fertile soil. But again, it's cotton doesn't require the same depth of soil, so it's a lot easier to grow. So there you go. So everyone says literally the same thing. They thought it was this normal, natural thing, right? They didn't think it was anything weird, but they took a closer look. And that's in most of these accounts that I have that I'm like, okay, this is a legit account. They're within 30, 40, 50 feet. These are not, oh, it was half a mile away. The furthest one I have is probably less than 100 feet away, but they're all within 30, 40, to 80 feet at best. And they're all in, I have several accounts that are literally involving the area where I had my encounter, and everything else is west. And the thing is, I've got accounts coming out of Crosbyton, Texas, which is 5 hours west of me. I know I made that trip a lot because the late Joe Taylor, the Mount Blanco Fossil Museum was out there. Went out there a bunch of times, loved him. He was a great guy. Got accounts out of that, right? And it appears that they are, my theory, they may be coming to this area to breed, right? And they migrate out, right? Once they get to a certain size, they can migrate. And it may be the ones in South Texas are the adult, a fully grown version of what's here in North Texas. Or they could be two completely different species. We don't know. But the reason it's a little weird is, again, there are a lot of accounts of what appear to be pterodactyls, meaning there's a crest, very large ones, right? But then they also have that tail with the flange. Well, pterodactyls didn't have a flange tail. They didn't have a long tail at all. But like one of the more famous pictures, I know Wickham shows, it's from the 60s and around Cuba, right? Shows what appears to be a pterodactyl with a long flange tail, which again, none of that with teeth. And it doesn't make sense if it's a pteranodon, but it makes a lot more sense if there's again, maybe it's a more modern version of something from the Rhamphorhynchus family that's gotten bigger and now has a crest, right? The coloration is pretty consistent. Either it's a gray or reddish brown tone. And people might say, well, the one you saw didn't have a crest. Right. Some are gray, some are reddish brown. How do you reconcile these changes? Well, I don't have to. It's obvious. Again, I can't say what it is for certain, but there's an obvious answer, which is sexual dimorphism. Most animals are sexually dimorphic, meaning females and males look different. It could be that the males have a crest, the females don't. Or it could be vice versa. It could be the males are reddish brown and the females are gray. Could be they change colors, right? Or it could be the head crest develops later in life. There's no way to know until we actually have a living population that we can observe and test and measure and over time. But the simple fact of the matter is, there's a very consistent set of data. There's no reason to think it's been contaminated because really this has been a forbidden topic. Even in the Fortean world, nobody was talking about living pterosaurs except for a few people, right? Up until very recently. And even then it's still sort of on the outskirts. So there's not a lot of room for contamination, unlike Bigfoot, where if someone spent enough time watching, a good couple episodes of, Finding Bigfoot or any of the other shows out there, listening to podcasts, you could very easily fake an encounter and a story just based off of what you hear in all this testimony. So there's not a lot of contamination for the pterosaurs. So it's very likely that this is a real living population. It's very, very small, right? But that it is real, and it's been with us for centuries. One of the pictures I gave you is a boy holding a pterosaur. Yes, Texas Jack, Crosbyton, Texas. There's a lot of pictures of people holding these massive pterosaurs, or and they're all fake. All of those are fake. This is literally the only photograph that I think has a really good chance of being real. Right? This is one of those photographs that's floated around for a very long time, right? It is pre-internet. The problem is no one seems to agree where it came from. Some say it's a Texas article, some say it's Tombstone, but everyone sort of dates it to around the 50s. And they claim that this thing was shot. A newspaper, came and took a photograph out of it, and it got published, and that was it. There's enough in this photo to suggest that it's real. As an artist, one of the things this is where I will absolutely put my artist credentials out there to say, when you fake something, particularly in the art world, you tend to fake what people are looking for or what they are expecting, because they're more likely to believe it, right?
That makes sense, yeah.
This is not what's in popular culture. Up until literally the Lost World movie, can you remember seeing a single movie, television show, cartoon, anything where the pterosaur that is used isn't a pteranodon?
Right, didn't have a crest and a big
Mhm.
obvious crest, and yeah, no, I agree.
And a beak and no tail.
Mm-hmm.
When you fake things, people fake what you're expecting. They fake what's in the zeitgeist. Ramphoractoids are not in the zeitgeist because they weren't the big, sexy things that, Raquel Welch was fighting,
What a
or
great
King
movie.
Kong. Yeah. I know.
Hey, do you know where people saw this originally? Do you know where it was published first? I'm just curious.
Off the top of my head, there's a book that it came out that this has always come out of. I cannot remember the book off the top of my head. Again, this is why I'm doing the website, so I can have all that information available. Because there's so many, like there were some pictures I wanted to show that I just didn't have on my laptop and I couldn't find them. That are important to this story as well. But the simple fact of the matter is, I can't say that is real because we haven't found the original newspaper, right? Yes, I did, Texas Jack. Crosbyton, Texas. Love it out there. It's so I can't say for 100% that it's real. What I can say is it's got a better chance of being real than a lot of other photographs. It doesn't have the hallmarks of traditional trickery or fakery. It's been around. It's very much a pre-internet, pre-computer thing. Doesn't mean it couldn't have been faked. It just means it's a little bit harder to fake. And there's a better chance of it being real. And again, for me as an artist, not just does it looks and feels right, but it's also not one of those things. If you fake, you don't fake that. And there's elements to it that are weird. Again, the fact that it's Rhamphorhynchus, it has that tail. That's and if you noticed, the skin flap from the wing. Oh, don't encourage Donnie. He's just going to do things. The skin flaps go all the way to the legs, right? That's not a traditional detail found in a lot of modern art, well, particularly not from the 70s, right? As far as the recreation. So it's not, there's enough weird there that I think has a very high caliber of being real. Also, my bias, it's what I saw, right? Now, the other thing is, and and I mean this is the worst part of the whole thing of my personal story, that we can get to sort of the broader thing here. I think I may have taken it down from Amazon. One of the first little booklets I wrote was called Wyvern. It was using art history to prove that Rhamphoractoid pterosaurs have been encountered for centuries.
You need to get that back up because I have not seen that available from you, or I would have bought it.
Yeah, it's kind of bad. What I'll do is I will turn it into I'll clean it up a lot, and I'll turn it into an article for Christian Paranormal Perspective. I want all of my thoughts to be free for everyone, right? You can pay for my beautiful, beautiful comic art.
That's fair. More than
Um,
fair.
so it's even that'll be free, but whatever. Um, I'm terrible at making money. Anyway, back to my point. So I had shown through our history that ramphoractoids have been around forever. And I still didn't believe I saw what I saw, because it would be several years after that until I talked to Ken and Lyle about what I saw. And they're like, oh yeah, here's this stuff that we're working on. In fact, you can go see the episode on it's American Monster Tour. It's on YouTube. It's the Oklahoma Demon Flyer. And it's there, the whole story. They have this little statue. I mean, like, that was what made me go, okay, I'm not crazy. Well, let me rephrase this. I'm not wrong. I'm clearly crazy.
So just to
but I'm not
qualify
wrong.
too for people there, that was a pilot series that
Mhm.
Lyle Blackburn and Ken Gerhard, arguably America's two best known, most recognizable, and most
Yeah.
interesting cryptozoologists, started to make their own show. An
Mhm.
awesome episode, and you feature heavily in that episode because they're tracking down
Yeah.
the Oklahoma. What did you say? Like
Demon Flyer.
essentially pterodons or
Yeah, exactly.
pterodactyls or
Yeah,
whatever.
we all saw the same thing, and
Right.
that was what sort of set me on my. And I was like 70 pounds heavier, so that's the other thing.
Man, you're
That's
looking
my other.
good these days. My goodness,
Thank
you're in
you.
great shape.
My goal is to probably another 80 pounds by the end of the summer. I'm gonna figure out how to make that happen.
Wow, that's a
So
lot.
I got a lot this year. But that being said, yeah, Ken Gerhardt's he's the cryptozoologist I want to be when I grow up. So the thing is, I had already written this book using our history to show, yeah, these things have been around. And I still didn't believe me. And it's yeah, I am. Trust me.
We can
where
read
I'm
that.
at-
That's from Jay Katz, probably, who,
Yeah.
along with his wife, Aspasia, hosts Down South Anomalies, also on the Untold Radio Network. And I cannot recommend people enough to check that show
Yes.
out if they haven't. It's one of my favorite,
Mhm.
not just on this network, paranormal
Anywhere.
shows out there. Jay and
Yeah, it's a great
Aspa
show,
are
guys.
so,
It
so
really is.
switched on. Anyway, you can read their comment if you want to there.
Yeah,
Jason.
Aspa60 says, website sounds so important. Great to see you, Jason. So missed. But no green screen. It looks like he slipped into the back rooms, the liminal spaces. I'm not saying where I work and live, basically, is a liminal space, but it very much is. There better not be a bacteria or a mold monster running around here. My wife's going to kill me. So
Good grief. It sounds like
if anyone knows what the back rooms is, they know what that's about. And I will not explain it. Anyway, moving on. So one of the things I point out in that little booklet, like I said, I'll put it on the website for free. I'll clean it up so it's. If you're looking at writing a book, just a little love from me to everyone listening. Sounding academic is boring as all get out. And again, if anyone knows how hard it is to write from sort of an academic perspective and be persuasive, he knows, because he's an actual academic.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my early works, I tried to give it a
boring,
more,
yeah.
I was trying to present it, and it's like, that's why I write comics. It's a lot more fun. Anyway.
Speaking of, 3 weeks ago here, or a
Mhm.
couple of weeks ago, I had another guest cancellation, and you filled in tonight. God bless you. But I literally read a chapter from my upcoming book, which I put on the shelf at the moment because I'm working on the Shaver Palmer documentary. But it's super academic, even though hopefully it was interesting. I just did a presentation. It was essentially just reading the chapter. If anybody wants to go back and check about me talking about UFO deception, where I'm listed as the guest because there is no guest. I love it when people cancel at the last minute. So much fun.
Oh, that's awesome. But yeah, I mean, you know how hard it is to write academically and be interesting, and I did a very bad job of it. That having been said,
your other books are fantastic, man. They're just so engaging. That's why I had you on originally, because the UFO Bigfoot Bible and I always want to say Megaplex, but it's Metroplex.
Metroplex, yeah.
I think because Megaplexes, I think there were Megaplexes in Australia in the cinema world. So I always call your Metroplex Monsters book Megaplex Monsters for some reason. Anyway, sorry, back to your story, which is more.
That actually sounds like a good book to do anyway. That may be a little further down the road. There you go. Metroplex or Megaplex Monsters. There we go. Anyway, so long story short, there's an account that comes out of France in the 1500s. And it's of a farmer who kills a small dragon. Essentially, the dragon hissed at the farmer, right? He had his cows, he was taking them out to water them. It's this small little dragon. It hisses at the farmer. He hits it on the head with his cane. He's just trying to run it off. He's not trying to kill this thing, right? But it dies, which that's actually going to be key to what happens moving forward. And he wasn't trying to kill it, but he did. He felt bad for it. He's like, I'm sorry, but he ends up taking it to France, to a university, and they put it on display. Well, a little over 100 years later, it is what is drawn by 3 different artists over about a 20-year period. And these were done much more realistically because we're starting to get into the Enlightenment age, and they're trying to do more naturalistic recreations and drawings of what's going on out there, right? I need to say this explicitly. What is drawn is very clearly a gaff, meaning gaffs are like when you think about the Fiji mermaid, right? They are things that are manufactured from the pieces of other animals to make a new one, right? And what you have to remember is there was no such thing as formaldehyde back then. There was no way to really preserve the original animal. So again, about 100 years later, that thing's gone, right? So they put on display a gaff, a recreation of what they had. And it has certain key elements: a spike at the end of its nose, 1 pair of wings, 1 pair of legs, and a long tail. We would call that a wyvern style dragon today. Well, the thing is, on these drawings, they show where the wings sort of fold 3 fingers. Now, there is a creature. There's only one species of creature, the Rhamphorhynchoids, that had a spike coming out of the snout. Again, the name Rhamphorhynchus means tooth-beaked, because there's a spike that one of the teeth actually makes it look like it's a beak. Again, 3 fingers on the wing. Again, pair of wings, 1 pair of legs, and a long flanged tail. Now you may be saying, but hold on, the drawings of these, that's made 100 years later, they don't have a flange on the end of these tails. You're right, they don't, because they didn't have anything to do that. But this is really interesting. When you think of a dragon's tail, you think of a little triangle on the end, right? Well, where does that enter into the art history? This is where the art history part of me gets to shine, right? There's a very, very, very specific time frame when that sort of dragon's tail enters into popular use, and that is literally the 1600s. Before that, all dragons from any culture in the West, any Western culture, had just a normal snake's tail. Like literally it was a snake's tail. Nothing fancy about it at all. However, 1600s, late 1500s, all of a sudden we start seeing in heraldic art what we would consider the traditional dragon's tail of today. That's literally from a flag. This emerges, this idea of how a wyvern is depicted literally emerges from this time frame when this creature is on display originally. And that's sort of the smoking gun here. That is a Rhamphorhynchus, again, portrayed from the Middle Ages, or the 15th, 16th century. But that's what it is. That's what they saw. That's what they're telling us. And that's evidence that these things have been around for a very, very long time. This isn't some new development. They've always been around. I would suggest the Jersey Devil is actually a Rhamphorhynchus, because what we forget is the drawing that we think of as, where it's this weird deer thing with bat-like wings, that comes from an artist working out of Philadelphia, right? In the 1800s, there was an account of this thing flying around. Hundreds of people see this thing. They describe it. You have to remember, dinosaurs were not popularly known at this time. Yes, they had been dug up, they had been named, but they weren't popularly known. So people didn't have this idea of the dinosaur in their head when they're looking at the thing. They are describing it in the best way they know how, which is to use parallelisms. The artist does not take their stories or their descriptions seriously. He takes them literally, which is why we get this weird deer thing, right? It's never described as having antlers or anything, and he gives it actual bat wings. Well, they said it had bat-like wings. What that means is it's a leathery winged creature. Doesn't mean it actually had a bat wing. They said it had like a deer-like face. Well, that's essentially they're just saying it's like a reptilian face, right? They were describing the thing the best way they knew how. But the key here is they said it had a bifurcated tail, or the tail of a demon or of the devil. Well, the reason the devil has that kind of tail is because it's of the association with the dragon. We have so that's a cockatrix. We'll come back to that one because that's actually really, really interesting. But the simple fact of the matter is what we have is a very consistent history of people seeing creatures that most closely resemble the ramphoractoid species of pterosaur. They are not dinosaurs. They're flying reptiles. It is consistent. It is almost universal. And yet it is also, even amongst the cryptids, it is the thing that is the most heavily sort of avoided. Because for particularly post World War I, as we've discussed often, there's this big push, right? It seems as if anything that really calls a lot of the modern Darwinian narrative into question is thrown out. Right?
Agreed.
And it's rejected on its face. And let's face it, living dinosaurs, even if that's not technically a dinosaur, it's going to cause people to ask questions that they don't want answered. Right? Because it's not just the ramphoractoids that have survived. Other dinosaurs have survived into the modern day and or at least recent times. And if we have them, then you got to explain why. How they survived for 65 million years unchanged. Because even you're like, well, hold on, Jason, didn't you just say, well, yeah, but we don't know what species the dinosaur, of pterosaur that I saw was. We don't know their lifespan. We don't know every dinosaur that ever existed. And we don't know what adaptations may have been made later, but that doesn't mean it's not the same thing. It's not, there's a difference between going from a T-Rex to a chicken, right? But if we don't see that kind of a great change, maybe we got something, Lucy's got some splaining to do here, right?
Absolutely.
I see Catherine Fourfeathers has a great question.
Okay, I put Catherine Fourfeathers' question up. Could you read it for the audience who are listening?
Sure. Catherine asks, I was going to ask if that photo you put up with the guy holding the winged creature, it sort of looked like this triangle at the end of the tail. Can you see it in that photo you put up? Yes, there is a flange on the end of the tail. If Dean can throw that up one more time. You may have to take down the the comment. It's covering the tail. So yeah, if you look at the very bottom of that tail, there is a flange on the end of that tail. Again, this is a very old black and white photograph. Again, assuming that it's not faked, and I've already explained why I think it's got a good chance of being real. It's got a flange on the end, and that's the thing, is that's what I saw, and that's what people have been seeing for centuries: winged pterosaurs with flange tails, which is a known family group of pterosaurs that were smaller than the pteranodons. And it also explains why the creature, the dragon that the farmer kills, he kills it accidentally because he wasn't trying to hurt it. He was just trying to scare it off. The thing about being able to fly means you have to be very, very light, which requires hollow bones. That's why it died so easily. He was expecting it to be more stout, more robust, right? But you hit it, you have those hollow bones, head caves in. It can't stand up to the pressure that was dropped on it. So every aspect of that story is very indicative that this was a living pterosaur. And we have a ton of accounts. By the way, Iguanodon is actually one of my favorite ones too. Actually, my favorite dinosaur, and I'm a Texan. I've never pronounced anything correctly in my life. Parasaurolophus. It's one of the hadrosaurs.
Parasaurolophus or something. Yeah,
Yeah,
my daughter can pronounce that. She's such a dino fan, but yeah,
I can't pronounce it.
Parasaurolophus or Parasaurolophus.
Yeah, it has. It's the hadrosaur that has the big sort of horn thing on the back. Yeah, I love that one. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, the simple fact of the matter is there's too much consistency over too long a period, over too much time, and too much landmass for this to be a coincidence. This is evidence that these things are alive, and it's not the only one. There are accounts of people describing dragons, and they call them dragons because that was the name that was used, right? All throughout history, there's dragons in Ireland that sound very much like a stegosaur. There's one in England where these two dragons were fighting that sounds like two ceratopsians. You've got the Congo, right? You've got mokele-mbembe, which sounds like a form of sauropod. There's another one whose name
there's a Kazi Rex in the Congo where there's 3 different hunting story reports from the 1930s to the 1950s.
Yes.
Where people saw essentially, this is something, to be honest, I don't want to pretend I'm more switched onto this than I am. I was researching for this show. Something called the Kazi Rex is described as a T-Rex-like thing, and it was seen by different Western hunting parties.
Yes.
Twice, and then potentially a third time when an entire party got killed in 1950 that were supposedly out hunting it.
Yes.
I mean, this is crazy stuff, but there was a well-known hunter in the 30s who saw it, and then a group of hunters after he saw it, and he'd taken a shot at it, and then he'd had all kinds of problems. And then a hunting party went out to kill the thing in a year after, like, I don't know, say he was 35, they were 36 or something like that, a year apart anyway. And then they saw this massive thing that splashed into the water. So it sounds maybe more like a Spinosaurus or something that lived in the water as well. And then later somebody else goes hunting for this thing 15 years later, and him and his party are killed.
Well, there's no reason to think
on top of I knew about mokele-mbembe. I didn't even know about the Kazi Rex today because I'm no cryptozoologist. So I'm out there digging up other supposedly living dinosaurs. And I'm like, there's something that looks like a T-Rex in the Congo as well as the mokele-mbembe.
Oh, that's not the only one. Yeah, I hadn't even gotten to that one. But yeah, you have the Kazi Rex, and we'll talk about the water thing here in a second. There's another one whose name I will not even try. It starts with an N. That's clearly a ceratopsian. It just is, right? It's called the elephant killer. It has a huge spike on the end of its nose. You can kind of see the frill. And again, that's known and has been described by the indigenous tribes forever. You've got the U-boat story after World War I of what appears to be a form of mosasaur is blown out of the water. We have Papua New Guinea. You've got the ropen, which appears to be another form of pterosaur that appears to bioluminesce. You have the Kongamato, which is another pterosaur. The simple fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter where you go. There are creatures and stories of dragons and that are clearly living dinosaurs. My favorite one, because it's the weirdest one, but it's also, I think, the most telling, is the one that is the cockatrix. If you want to throw that one up, that was the last one's the carved one. So this is my favorite one because the cockatrix real quick little side note for people who are history and buffs and all that. The lore and mythology around the cockatrix itself as a dragon seems to have switched out depending on, at some point sort of switched out with I just forgot the name. Oh, dang it. It literally just jumped my mind. It's another
a griffin?
No. It's another dragon. It was one of the words that was actually used in the King James. It's actually just a cobra, but okay, it doesn't matter. We'll move on. Basilisk, that's it, the basilisk. So at some point, the basilisk and the cockatrix, like their powers, from a mythological perspective, they seem to switch. But the thing about the cockatrix is a dragon that has the head and upper torso of a chicken. Okay? But then the rest of the body is of a dragon. Now that sounds hilariously absurd to modern people, right? It's a chicken dragon. That's crazy. That's insane.
They haven't met my roosters. My roosters can be crazy.
Tell me about it. Yeah, chickens know they're dinosaurs, man. if you've ever met a cheesed off rooster, you'll know how vicious they can get. There's
I
a
can't
reason.
even I can't even turn my back on one of my roosters, man.
No, you can't. I see all these people like, oh, chickens are cute. I'm like, no, they're not. They are vicious, vicious killers. And the roosters are hugely aggressive. Why do you think you have cockfighting, right?
Hmm.
It's like they want to fight. They're very vicious.
I had 2 roosters here. One's gone now. I think a predator
Mhm.
took it. But they would, in the spring, when their, I guess, chicken testosterone got up,
Yep.
they would try to kill each other every spring. I mean, they would
Mhm.
be blood. I'd have to hose them to get them apart and separate one, put it in another cage because they would be blood drenched and they weren't going to stop. They had no intention of stopping.
Oh
Like
yeah.
and this didn't
Mm-mm.
happen once or twice. This happened like 4 or 5 times. It was
Oh, all the
hideous.
time. Yeah. Anyone, like I said, you can tell when people have no real experience in the country because they're like, oh, chickens are so cute. It's like, first of all, chickens are stupid. They're the only animal I'm aware of that you can reboot. I'm not kidding when I say that you can reboot a chicken. But specifically, like roosters, they will tear you up if you give them a chance.
Mhm.
Anyway, but back onto this thing. So the cockatrix is a mythologically is this dragon that has the head and upper body of a chicken, but the rest of it's a dragon. Sounds absurd. Well, let me ask you this, dear listeners and viewers. How would you, if you lived, say, in Persia 2,000 years ago, how would you describe something like, say, a velociraptor? Or say, really, my favorite go-to is the oviraptor because it has a beak and a crest on its head, right? We know theropods had feathers. Velociraptor, the oviraptors, in fact, most people think now that Tyrannosaurus had feathers, right? How do you describe a creature that is a bipedal, a theropod, um, looks like looks like a dragon or has serpentine features, but also, particularly if it's something like an oviraptor that has a beak, it's got a beak and it's got feathers, but then it's also got claws and, a long reptilian tail. Like, how do you describe that? You call it a cockatrix. You say it's a dragon that has the head and upper body of a yeah, that's it. That's the one. I can't say it, but Texas Jack has
A Mila Matuka or something. That's the one which is like the elephant killer, right? The one
yeah,
which is
mhm,
like
yeah.
what's that type of dinosaur? The
A
stegosaurus,
ce
not the
it's
triceratops type.
Yeah, yeah, it's a ceratopsian. So it doesn't have 3 horn it's one that only has it's a monohorn or a monoceros, but so again, what we have is accounts of creatures that don't make sense up until the last 20, 30 years. We didn't realize in fact, it wasn't literally until the 90s that we realized that the theropods were warm-blooded, that the theropods were avian. We didn't know that. That wasn't even on the board until the mid-90s. And yet here we are. And now we look back at something like the cockatrix and it's like, well, hold on, that's really interesting. That makes a lot more sense if that's what they're seeing. It's not ridiculous. They're just trying to tell us something the only way they knew how. So what do we do with that? That's the real question. Is it that all of these things are made up? Or are we all missing? Hey, uh, Dean, you and I have had this conversation 1,000 times, literally. I am 30 seconds away from saying all the weird stuff, all cryptozoology, all of it is paranormal, right? I am. But the stuff that I easily throw into the paranormal category, it changes all the time. It changes with cultures. It changes with how we view the universe. These things don't change. They're very consistent, which is what you would expect with a living, breeding population of animal that's maybe endangered, but still around, still living. Maybe something doesn't really want to hang around us a lot. And by the way, cryptids, I get it. I don't like people either. All right. That's very well deserved. But a lot of these things make sense as living dinosaurs. So if that's the case, the question is then how did they get here? And this is where people like to throw around ideas like, hey, maybe it's wormholes and time portals and aliens that have taken them and brought them back, and it's like aliens on a spaceship. My favorite Doctor Who episode, by the way, aliens on a spaceship. Well, maybe it's my second favorite. Anyway, no, it's my favorite. I don't know, man. The one written by Neil Gaiman where he talks to the TARDIS because it's put into a person. That was really
Man,
good.
anything
Anyway,
post Tom Baker isn't worth watching. You know, I met Tom Baker like properly personally in my father's
Really?
office. Oh, absolutely, because my father had a computer business
Yeah.
in the early days called Prime Computers. It was a massive
Mm-hmm.
company, which he was
Mhm.
one of the, I think, 2 owners of in Australia. And they had Tom Baker as the guy who did their TV ads dressed as Doctor Who with his associate Leela in Doctor Who style episodes on mainstream television. And
Really?
they flew him out to do a promotion for the company. And so me as
Wow.
this little boy who was a biggest Doctor Who fan you could imagine got to go into my father's office, and there's Doctor Who in his personal office, like in my dad's office. And my little brother was there, and he knelt down next to my little brother was tiny. Like
Yeah.
Tom Baker was a big man.
Oh yeah,
6
he was
feet down.
huge. Yeah.
He knelt down, he looked at my little brother in the face and said, "I know you. You've been watching me on the television." Can you imagine that?
That's awesome.
When you're like 5 years old or something?
That's
good
cool.
grief. But anyway, no.
Yeah. No, Tom Baker, Matt Smith, and then I'm good after that. But anyway,
But
yeah,
you
my
know,
point
but
is,
what you were saying with the
Yeah.
leaning
Mhm.
towards the biblical stuff, I think that's part of the problem. I think part of the
Mhm.
problem is that if we say there are dinos today,
Mhm.
what does that say about the traditional Darwinistic evolutionary story we've been told?
Yes.
And if you start acknowledging some relatively recent claims in paleontology that
Mhm.
there is like real like tissue remaining in
Mhm.
some dinosaur digs, including T-Rex bones.
Yeah.
Now, you can convince me you might have some tissue left if something died 1,000 years ago and was put in the dirt, right? Maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe the right conditions, but who can
Mhm.
honestly tell me? And this is where I separate from a lot of, well, you know, I'm a
Yeah.
40, and so I don't trust science at all. It's just who I am. But this is where I separate from the traditional narrative, because are you really trying to tell me that a T-Rex that lived how many millions of years ago, they can still get soft tissue out of
Yeah.
the remnants of that thing, which is meant to be fossil anyway, right? It's not even meant
Yeah.
to be the original tissue of the creature anyway. It's meant to be some
Mhm.
process. So I think that is
Mhm.
perhaps what you were suggesting, is that one of the reasons the dino thing wasn't as accepted by a more science-based cryptozoology pounding on the doors of the scientific establishment was to claim that there are dinosaurs, whether there are or not. Just dismiss that
Yeah.
whole idea. But we won't even say whether there are or not. But to make the claim that there are, it calls an awful lot of the traditional timelines regarding the
Mhm.
history of this planet
Yeah.
into, I mean, disrepute, really. Like if there's dinosaurs still, even if there's soft tissue being found in dinosaur
Yeah.
remains, you have to re-examine it.
Mhm.
And I think one of the, I'm not saying this is what Darwinism or the modern construct of the history of the planet is built on, but certainly the popular version of it is. The popular version that every little kid, including me and you and every other kid from, I don't know, probably from the late 19th century onwards, the basis of our belief that the earth was this incredible old time span was that dinosaurs lived millions and millions and millions and
Yeah.
millions of years ago. So if you start saying, well, there are still dinos in the Congo and dinos in Texas and dinos in Papua New Guinea, and we're digging up T-Rex remains with soft tissue still available in them, you
And
start to go,
and carbon 14. In fact, I literally
right.
last week. Yeah, like last week, Donnie, I was on Donnie's show. Randy and I did a little kayfabe on him. We were going to do this big smashdown between old Earth and we came on and we were very respectful. And Donnie finally flipped out midway through the episode, like, what is going on? But that's the problem, right? If you have living dinosaurs, if you have, and again, reports that makes it clear they've always been here. If you have carbon 14 in coal that is hundreds upon hundreds of millions of years old, if you have carbon 14 and soft tissue and DNA in dinosaur bones that are 65, 75, 100 plus million years old, you've got a problem. Carbon 14, it degrades, has a half-life of 5,700 years. That means after 10 half-lives, it should be basically zero. Definitely after 20 half-lives, it should be gone. That means you should not be able to ever measure anything older than 50,000 years using carbon 14. And yet, things that are hundreds, and tens of millions of years old have active carbon-14. DNA is worse. The half-life of DNA, vastly worse. But we have active DNA. We have active hemoglobin. We have dinosaur bones that are unfossilized. And they went unrecognized as dinosaur bones for decades because they were unfossilized. Everyone just assumed they had to be bison bones because there's no way that you can have dinosaur bones unfossilized and still have them last for 65 million years. And everyone's trying to find some way to explain it. The problem is you can't really prove it. That's the problem, is that everything we know, everything that we can test in a laboratory says that's not possible. And so what we have is that which is actually observable in a laboratory says these things have to be younger. Maybe they're 20,000 years. Like I said, I've always been very flexible as what does young Earth mean? However, I would suggest 6,000, 7,000, 20,000 years of age. That's a bunch of people eating, having a conversation, eating chips and salsa, right? You start talking about hundreds of millions of years, that's a different restaurant altogether. Like I said, I'm very flexible as to what young Earth can mean. My thing is the actual evidence we have suggests dinosaurs did not die out tens of millions of years ago. They went extinct at the same time that they were fossilized. Because the fossilization process is also clearly a very rapid thing. I want to get back to Horace's question here in a second because that's a really great question.
We'll close on that, but finish with this first, then we'll come back to Horace.
But it's very, very clear. Fossilization has to be a very rapid process. It has to be. Pull up the fossil of the Rhamphorhynchus. Because we find what we're calling mummified dinosaurs all the time, where you see the skin. Look at that creature. We have not just the bones, we have the wings. That's soft tissue. We have fossilized soft tissue.
It's staggering.
On a number. In fact, all around the world, you can find fish fossils. In fact, they're my favorite fossils. I love them. They're beautiful. But you can find fossils of fish eating other fish, marine reptiles giving birth.
They're beautiful. My mother bought me when I was a kid a fish fossil, and it was such a beautiful thing. Just gorgeous to look at.
But stop to think about, how does a fish eating another fish, and literally it's not like it's in its stomach, it is in the mouth. How quickly does that have to fossilize? What could possibly do that? And the simple fact of the matter is, you put all of these things together, it had that they went extinct in a much shorter life, again, within thousands of years, not tens of millions, thousands. That probably the reason most of them have gone extinct was because of what fossilized them. We have, and the fact that we have some living today, that's all evidence that the mainstream Darwinian method or Darwinian narrative is not correct. It is, in fact, it violates everything that we can see and observe and test in a lab. That's why these things are not discussed. And unfortunately, to answer Horace's question, if you want to pull it up, because it's a great question.
No, let's do Horace's question. Horace is Horace Smith is been a guest a number of times on this show. Also, I think he was on tour, maybe even Mysterious Library once. He certainly was always engaged with us, and he is Professor Emeritus of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State University. Super switched on guy. We love having your questions.
Love him. His books are great, by the way.
They're spectacular.
Well, I have to read the new one that he did on
Lovecraft.
With Lovecraft. I love Willimantic Skies. Again, astronomy was always my favorite thing. But Horace says, you've likely already discussed the question of what evidence is sufficient. Are reports enough? Is a captured living dinosaur required? Common crypto issues, I suppose. Yes. The problem is, whether it's Bigfoot or any of the cryptids, right? Any of what I would consider the physical cryptids, and even Bigfoot's, that's a whole other kettle of fish. But as far as living dinosaurs, I think we have to capture them alive. It would be one thing if we could find maybe a recently deceased thing that might be possible. But the problem is, if it's dead, it'll be too easy for people who do not want the reality of these things to be exposed to say, "Oh, it's a model. It's been faked." I think this is the real problem. We have to have them alive in order to really show, no, this is a living, breathing creature, right? I mean, that's what we're dealing with.
It's fascinating. Remember
Mhm.
when we did a documentary I screened at Midwest Weird Fest a couple of years ago, Alexandra Bracher's The Wonderful The Explorer, and people should try to search that documentary out. It's about a cryptozoologist who has been looking for the mokele-mbembe in the Congo
Yeah.
Basin for many
Yes, yes, yes.
years, and Alexandra Bracher goes with
Mhm.
him on this incredible documentary. And I shouldn't do spoilers, but I'm going to have to because of the way
Yeah.
I let in. But
Mhm.
they find footprints in that documentary.
Yeah.
And Alex is somebody who's worked for major NGOs. Like, the reason he got interested in this is because he was working for major NGOs in Africa and heard a story from their kind of, I guess, park service about these animals that terrified the elephants at night when they heard them stampeding. And they were the
Yeah.
mokele-mbembe. And he's like, what's that? And they're like, they explained it to him. It was like a brontosaurus or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, he captures footprints in that documentary. And I don't believe for
Yeah.
a second that Alex would hoax that stuff. He's a man who my
Yes.
interactions with him, he seems super switched on, super honorable, highly placed in the NGO world. And I know Doug Hychek, who runs this channel, had done an episode on the mokele-mbembe where there
Yes.
was similar suggestions and evidence of things living in the banks of rivers in the Congo.
Yes.
So if something like this exists, I'm not saying that there aren't, pterodons or something in Texas, but when you get these areas like the Congo Basin where so few people have gone there, is it not unbelievable that there's something there that might not be expected by science? And incidentally, we don't even have time to do this tonight. This is another show altogether. But the oceans of this planet, Lord
Oh,
knows
absolutely.
what's in those.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, right? To answer, Corey said, asked the question about fossilization. Is it rare, perfect soil conditions? No, that's the thing. It's the only way to fossilize things is with water. The Lost World Museum has a great series showing you need water to fossilize something. It's heavy mineralization in the water. To your point, if something went extinct 1,000 years ago, it's not going to leave. There's not going to be fossil evidence of it, right? Just not. None of the buffalo that Wild Bill Hickok went out and killed are ever going to turn into a fossil. There you
I wish
go.
Carnival Cruise Lines went to the Congo, Jay, and Aspasia. And we could
Yeah.
all go. We could have like a talking weird cruise to the Congo, and we could go out there looking for the mokele-mbembe. And that's also
That'd
where
be fun.
the Kaze Rex is in somewhere in the Congo Basin,
Yeah,
supposedly.
and the other one whose name I cannot pronounce. Well, and so here's the thing, right, about the Congo. The thing about the Congo, everyone that tends to be ignored is essentially a giant swamp. You can search. You can do a good solid search of about 1 linear mile a day in those conditions. People don't understand what that means. You're not looking for a square. You can't search a square mile. It's a linear mile. That's as far as you're making it a day. And if you're going to do an actual search, that's insane. The Congo is massive. It is massive. It's this giant swamp, heavily forested, and you can't just go again a linear mile. Look, Texas is big, but the Congo is massive, and it's very, very dense. This is not an easy thing. It's very easy to imagine something like that. But the thing is, if something went extinct 1,000 years ago, we wouldn't have any record of it because there's nothing left. It's all turned to dust unless we get supremely lucky. But again, how many endangered species keep popping up, or things that were supposed to be extinct keep popping up? The thing is, we only really see the most prominent and most common creatures, right? The ones with the largest population. Things with the smallest population tend to be harder to find. And the problem is the few people who see them, if you have the entire world telling you that you're crazy, then when you see it, guess what you do? You shut up. You don't talk about it.
Yeah, it must be
You
different to
suppress
say.
it.
It must be different to say you've seen a pterodon than it is to say I've seen a UFO, or even to see a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. No, I mean it's easier now to say you've seen a Bigfoot or a UFO than a pterosaur, because I mean, since the 60s, you've had movies and books, and people are willing to tell that story of Bigfoot or the UFO. But to say you've seen a pterosaur, nah, you're crazy. They went extinct tens of millions of years ago.
And just one thing too, because we probably
Mhm.
should close it. I'll let you have the final words, though. Is there's a lot of people I know who watch Talking Weird and have listened to you and me talk on Mysterious Library. I'm skeptical of a lot of things, like I am. I mean,
Mhm.
my skeptic hat goes on.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
also a 40 in those, so I'm not a skeptic in
Mhm.
the traditional scientific way. I just don't necessarily think every claim
Mhm.
is somehow
Right.
necessarily a
No,
legitimate
right
one.
there with you.
But what
Mhm.
always bothers me when skeptics dismiss pteranodons or pterosaurs or whatever
Mhm.
we're calling them, and you're far more, you have a far better handling of the language of the different species than I do. Or it's similarly with Mothman. When somebody tries to tell me that Mothman's a sandhill crane, or that what you saw is some kind of, I don't know, crane or goose or pelican or whatever, it's like,
Yep.
out in the real world, I see sandhill cranes all the time, or cranes like that in this
Mhm.
part of the world. I'm never going to mistake that for freaking Mothman.
Hmm.
I've seen pelicans fly in Australia multiple times. I would never mistake that for some kind of pterosaur. And people, presumably in areas where these things exist, have also seen these birds
Yep.
somewhat frequently. So to think that somehow all of a sudden Mothman is actually can be explained by a sandhill crane, or that your sighting can be
Yeah.
explained by a pelican or something, it's absolutely ludicrous, because it assumes the person's never, maybe the person had been, I don't know, lived in New York City their whole life and had just moved to a
Yeah.
rural area and had seen one of these things. That people in these areas see these things all the time. They're not all of a sudden going to mistake what they've seen as a
Yes.
prehistoric
Mhm.
reptile or as a Mothman, because they know what the things look like. It's just such a ludicrous,
Exactly.
skeptical, debunking argument, which just has always left me cold.
Well, and so that's again, literally one of the things I use to say, okay, I'm not going to count this guy's or this person's account as credible, is because, like, yep, no, I knew exactly what it was as soon as I saw it. I heard, I could feel it was a pterosaur, which I've never actually had that encounter. It's like, okay, that's to every single story I've heard was, I thought it was this, right? And then I got a closer look of it. By the way, Mothman, that's exactly something that was a sandhill crane pretending to be a man would say. That's all I'm saying. We know the truth. You're a sandhill crane. But that's the point, right? Again, like I said, I thought I was looking at a blue heron. Since he's passed, I can tell this story now. My dad well, he didn't. It was an accident. Anyway, he shot a blue heron one time out on our property. I know what a blue crane looks like, or blue heron looks like. That's what I thought I was looking at until it
I
was
hope you
5 feet
guys
from
at
my
least
face.
ate the thing. You can't. I'm guessing you can't shoot them. I don't know what the rule
Yeah,
is about eating them.
you're not supposed to shoot him. Anyway, and there's
Tasty
not.
though. Tasty though. You can.
Yeah,
You tell me out. You tell me after the show.
yeah, we'll talk after. Anyway, point being, um, yeah, two sandhill cranes in a trench coat, Texas Jack. That's the thing, right? It's there's I know everyone says, I thought it was a pelican. I thought it was this. And then I got a closer look. Everyone starts off with, I thought it was something that was normal, natural, that I'm very familiar with. And then I got a closer look and I'm like, what the heck am I looking at? Only one person that I believe, because of who it is and the situation, who's like, doesn't have that story. And it's because broad daylight, he looks up, he sees the thing, and he's like, there's no way for this not to be something weird. In fact, he used the word Mothman with me, and he
Oh
wouldn't even tell
wow.
me, because he was like, he literally came to me, he's like, Jason, if just let me know if you hear any accounts of Mothman or something in the area of the next couple. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I had to pry it out of him. This is not someone who, he still doesn't believe me. He doesn't believe I'm a liar. He's like, I just, you're my boy. I think maybe you're wrong. He's like, I don't know what I saw. He's like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, you were literally less than a mile from my sighting. You live off the creek that I saw it in. Right. So back to your point. Yeah. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is we should be skeptical. The problem is, I think what we see when people who call themselves skeptics today, they're not skeptics, they're scofftics.
Yeah,
They
it's
are
not the same thing.
they are promoting a religion, and it is a religious viewpoint. That's what this is, right? I keep saying it's not actually science versus religion, it's religion versus religion, and science is simply the tool that we're using to beat each other up with, right?
And
So
science is a mutilated octopus. There's a quote from Charles Fort.
yeah.
We often had this clash between you, me, and Horace. I think you were in the middle. Horace was the scientist, and you were like the reasonable human being. And I'm like, I don't trust science at all. I'm a Fordian. Sorry. Bye.
Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, that's it. So
well, man, it was. I can't wait to see your new website. I can't wait to see your new comic. So you have to come back and actually present people with what's happening, and also with the web addresses and the places they can go to get access to your stuff. And let's do that when you're ready. Hopefully it'll be in a few months.
Yeah, in the next couple of months, I'll have everything up and running, and I'll come back and we can talk about it.
I just can't wait, man. It was such a great joy to talk to you. Thank you so much for visiting me again on
Always a
Talking
pleasure,
Weird.
Gene.
And this is our old mysterious library spot. This is where we traditionally spoke to each other and to our audience every night for more than a year. So thank you for coming back with me, brother. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, man. And again, chat, love y'all, always have, always will.
Yeah, the chat were great tonight. Until I talk to everybody else in chat, and until I talk to you again, hopefully sometime very soon, Jason, please keep it weird.